Good morning, everyone. We are continuing with our roadmap for right living. Yesterday and for several days we've been dealing with success. Now we're going to be talking about the quality of love. So let's start with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Master Paramahansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, dear friend and guide Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to all. Bless us that we may draw your wisdom, your love, and your joy into our hearts, minds, and spirits, that everything we do in this world will be an expression of your presence. We are your children. Guide us and bless us. Om. Peace. Amen. So, Swamiji has written this book, which I've been working from, which is called, now it's called Affirmations for Self-Healing. As I've mentioned, I'm not teaching it as a class in affirmations, although we will be touching on the affirmation. And he's for each quality, which are 52 qualities in this book, he has an affirmation, a prayer, and a short explanation of the self-realization way to understand this important human quality. So I think what I'll do, even though I'm going to go word by word almost through it, is I think I'll read everything that Swamiji has written as we begin, so that we'll have a context for where we're going. So, quality number 2, love. One finds love not by being loved, but by loving. We can never know love if we try to draw others to ourselves, nor can we find it by centering our love in them. For love is infinite. It is never ours to create. We can only channel it from its source in infinity to all whom we meet. The more we forget ourselves in giving to others, the better we can understand what love really is. And the more we love as channels for God's love, the more we can understand that His is the one love in all the universe. The affirmation Swami wrote, and we'll come back to these, but I'm just giving you the picture now. I will love others as extensions of my own self, self with a capital S, and of the love I feel from God. And our prayer is, O Infinite One, make me a channel for thy love. Through me, reach out to sow seeds of love in barren hearts everywhere. So, let us now take this apart line by line. One finds love not by being loved, but by loving. That is very contrary to the way everybody thinks, especially these days where the idea of being part of a greater reality is not all that popular. This is an age of what can I get for myself and how much of it can I get, and setting my boundaries and knowing who I am and what I want and what I need and declaring my reality. And all of that is not bad in itself. It's only when an idea that has merit gets taken beyond the point of balance. And of course, the fundamental difficulty in our age right now is that we have no sense of, well, I use the phrase, of a greater reality. We just see our human ego, its egoic desires, and all the other egoic selves of the people around us. That's kind of the whole context that we're interplaying with all the time, and it doesn't lead to clarity, is the problem, because it's an incomplete picture of reality. One finds love not by being loved, but by loving. Of course, this is dependent on what's written later, is that love is a reality in the universe and is infinite in its potential. And what we need to do is we need to step into the stream of love. Now, it's not that by loving we are not loved. So it's not that Swami's saying, forget about being loved, only think about loving. What he says is one finds love, not by seeking to be loved, but by finding ways to give love. Because you see, this whole universe, and love is a magnificent example of this, these are vibrations of energy, and vibrations of energy are affected by fields of magnetism. And so this is one of the many Dwapara Yuga ideas that those of us who are consciously trying to cooperate with this rising energy are working with, but society as a whole is gradually trying to figure out. And this is by no means esoteric knowledge now. This is like New York Times national bestsellers, at least in the USA, where people are beginning to talk about it's the vibration you put out, it's the magnetism you put out, it's the power of your thoughts that begin to mold the universe. This is pure Vedanta. This is pure Sanatan Dharma, just without the extra helpful idea of there actually being an infinite divine force. And then you go a step further, that there's saints and sages who can help you find that, and the gurus who will guide you. This has been an interesting progression for me over 50 years of following these teachings. In this sense, let me say this, Swamiji always drew for us a very interesting picture of how society shifts its values, shifts its way of operating, shifts its culture. He said, and Swami gave many historical examples, when new thoughts come in, when new ideas come into civilization from a higher source of wisdom, there's always a few people who grasp it first. And usually those few people begin to find each other. He talked about the Renaissance in Europe, or even when Darwin was writing his theories of the advancement of species, there was a scientist named Wallace who was actually writing the same ideas at the same time. Darwin published his just a nanosecond before Wallace did. Wallace was more spiritually oriented, but it was the destiny of our culture that Darwin got in there first. New trends in music, new trends in art, new trends in science. It's always a group of people, not necessarily a large one, 12 disciples of Christ, who catch the wave first, and then their magnetism begins to affect society. And the way Swami talked about it is society is just walking down the middle of the sidewalk, and a small group of people move off to one side, and they start creating a vortex of energy off to one side. And gradually the whole column of society is pulled into what was first just a side vortex, and then pretty soon mainstream society is running right through the middle of where that small group was living on the edge before. The cutting edge, you might call it, or the lunatic fringe. It all depends on your perspective. I've always enjoyed being part of the lunatic fringe, so that's my favorite. And in this context, let me finish this thought first. So in 1966, I started baking my own bread. Sometimes we'd even grind our own flour. People would grind their own flour. I never did that myself. We started buying organic foods. We stopped buying processed foods altogether. I had to, any kind of health food product, yogurt, ice cream, as I said, bread, whatever it might be. And I went into a community eventually where we had our own chickens, we had our own cows, we grew our own food, all those things, because mainstream society did not support that way of life. But we began to develop that way of life, and people began to form businesses around that way of life. And it just began to be known. And gradually what happens now is I can go into Walmart's and there's an organic food section. I can go into Safeway and buy most of the healthy brands that I would like to buy. When I was in seclusion writing a book up in this really rural part of Washington, which Washington State, which you would not call an enlightened area compared to the Bay Area by any means. But the grocery store there had almost all the healthy foods that 50 years earlier I would have had to make myself. And it was because a group of people moved in the forward direction from society, created enough magnetism, and then society passed right through it. Now, I was amused many years ago. There was a man named Michael Toms, who now is off the planet, but he was a wonderful fellow. And he actually was in San Francisco starting in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. And he had a radio program which was called New Dimensions. And over the course of all those years, Michael was a very brilliant and wonderful man. And he conducted interviews with all of the most forward-thinking people in the world. He just found them and then had them come on his radio program. Eventually, the rest of the world realized how valuable the information was that he gathered, and all of his recordings, I believe, are like a part of the Stanford University Library now, because they are recognized as such a historical resource to show how society transformed. He was a friend of Ananda. He interviewed Swami several times. And there was a point at which we were all beginning to be part of what was called the New Age. And this was in the 70s. The phrase the New Age was very popular. There was even a magazine called New Age. And finally, Time magazine at that point, which was one of the mainstream journals for news in the country, the cover story was about the New Age. And I remember Michael Toms on the radio program the week that came out. He said, hear it on New Dimensions Radio tonight, read about it in Time magazine 5 years later. He said like that. But then after he made that, rather sarcastic remark, he got very serious. And he said, folks, we have to be more than 5 years ahead of Time magazine. If our imagination is so weak that Time magazine can catch up to us in 5 years, we're not doing our job properly. And I've always remembered that because I really appreciated how true it was, especially with what Swami was saying about society runs down the sidewalk, and those who are innovators move over until they develop enough magnetism for society to move into it. So, organic foods, whole grain cereals. I was in seclusion once many years later, and I have my own, diet, and I follow it in my own way. But I was in seclusion at Ananda Village at the meditation retreat, and they were bringing me meals, but then the kitchen closed for a day or two, and so they brought me just raw materials. And one of the boxes they brought me was because at that time I didn't shop mainstream very much. They brought me a box of cereal, and it was a major brand. It might have even been General Mills. General Mills mattered to me at that time. In the 60s, General Mills made Cheerios and Wheaties and all of the main breakfast cereals that someone of my generation knows. A friend of mine, who was actually the center of our learning about Eastern teachings, this man, he worked he was married and had a family. He was a little more settled than the rest of us. He worked as an accountant for General Mills, and he told us that if we bought General Mills cereal, we should take the cereal on the inside and throw it away, and cut up the cardboard box and put it in our bowl with milk and sugar, because there was more nutrition in the cardboard box than there was in the cereal that was on the inside. He worked for the company. I can't vouch for it, but I've always remembered that. So here I am in seclusion, and somebody sends me a box of General Mills cereal so that I'll have something to eat while I'm there. Sometimes in seclusion, at least for me, I end up with these jokes that are just so funny. I'm all by myself, and I think they're just so funny. Apparently, I'm going to just riff on the rest of this for a minute. Apparently, laughter is one of the things that happens when the Kundalini rises. Not always, but sometimes. A tiny bubble of laughter. I have become the sea of mirth itself is the ending line in Master's poem Samadhi. One time at the Christmas meditation, this was like the third or fourth year, I was in the Christmas meditation. in the middle of the meditation, I had an almost irresistible need to just laugh out loud. And it was just coming from nowhere, and I just wanted to laugh. And I was so deluded that I actually thought that if in the middle of this silent 8-hour meditation, if I just began to laugh merrily, everybody in the room would just laugh merrily with me. And just a fragment of common sense kept me from doing it. But it was very hard to suppress it, but I made it through. Later I mentioned it to Swami, and that was when he said to me, he said, sometimes when the spirit is rising in you, it does come out as laughter. So I have found on occasion, when I've been in long periods of seclusion, something will just strike me as hilariously funny, and I will just laugh and laugh. So I'm back to the cereal box. In the cereal box, I say, why are they giving me this? You know, I think about cutting up the box and eating it from my past. But I see that it's a flake, and it's a whole grain flake. And the cover of it, see, this is going to make me laugh now. The cover of it is a greatly enlarged cereal flake on the cover. And there's even a little note that says, larger than actual size. And they enlarge it so that you can see that it has grain and it has these little things like that. And I thought, wow, here we are, but we've got to be more than 5 years ahead of Time magazine. You know, the revolution that we're offering is bigger than a whole grain flake, larger than actual size on the front of a box. I also, because I do promotion and publicity for Ananda at that time, I thought, you know, just somebody somewhere took a picture, enlarged it, wrote the caption. But it was just like, boy, they're trying so hard to prove what they just dismissed as just lunacy when we were first proposing it. I mean, we were laughed out of town. Nobody would pay any attention to us. And now they recognize that it's an ideal marketing tool. This is what I call God Bless America, where if there's money in it, somebody will do it. And that's the free market system, and that's the glory of it, which is that you can inspire people to go in new directions by simply presenting something to them that they never considered before. So now where I live, especially because I live in the Bay Area in California, which is one of the most forward-looking places on the planet. Forward-looking places have dispersed a lot from the Bay Area, but this was the starting point of this. California, the California coast, north and south, but especially this area, which is why actually 35 years ago, Swami Kriyananda wanted us to start a center here. He said, this influences the whole world if we establish Master solidly in this area. And he felt the same way about our school. If we can get our Education for Life school successfully grounded in this area, people will take it very seriously, because they take seriously what comes from Silicon Valley, from Palo Alto, from Mountain View, San Jose, right where we are. Okay, so where I live, which is indicative of where the world is going, everyone knows about yoga, they know about meditation. When I came here 35 years ago, we were the only game in town, virtually. Just like if you wanted to learn meditation, you had to come to the Ananda temple, because who else was teaching it? Now you can go everywhere. At the YMCA, where I go to swim, they actually, I think they were embarrassed, and so they changed it. They created a new exercise room, and they called it the Mind Body Studio. But somebody realized that it was just exercise machines, so they had overnamed it slightly, so they took that title down and whatever it was. But even the idea that they want to call it the Mind Body Studio. But the fact is that the mere fact that society has moved over into meditation and yoga, what Swami has to offer, what Master has to offer, is a revolution so far beyond that. It's an entirely new way of thinking about the world. I mean, you start with Kriya Yoga and guru-disciple relationship, but the more fundamental principle is that we are a part of all that is. Now, what people are grasping, what people are beginning to understand, is the energy nature of the universe and the power of magnetism, the power of thought, the degree to which I am actually in charge of my own destiny. But as I was saying perhaps yesterday in one of my recent talks about the energy, people feel the energy coming in, and some people are trying to master it with their egos. And so we feel this rising potential within us, but many people, just because habitually they think this is my energy. This is my energy to use as I want to use it. When Swamiji wrote this marvelous course, it's called Material Success and Happiness Through Yogic Principles. You can buy the published written version. You can also get the audio book of Swami reading it. If you go to Crystal Clarity Publishers, I highly recommend it. 26 lessons. I also gave a very long course on it, which is rather obscure on the Ananda Palo Alto site, but you can find it. It's because it's an audio, not a video course. Anyway, Swami wrote that course, and he wrote it because he could see the necessity to integrate what people considered worldly and spiritual life, which is really just one flow of energy. So when Swami wrote this course, people asked him, what's the difference between your prosperity course, as they were calling it for shorthand, and those written by, and they named a few other very well-known prosperity teachers. And Swami's answer was, I am the disciple of a great master, which at first seems like kind of a non sequitur, but that was his explanation. I am the disciple of a great master. So here's what he was actually saying, which is the material world is run from a higher level. The material is the final manifestation of a much more subtle and much more powerful realm. And most prosperity courses, even though they have and this is not to say they're not without enormous benefit or not effective, because the ones that are effective are teaching you to work with energy. There's no question about it. You're working with energy. You're not just moving material things around. And that's Dwapara Yuga coming in, being absorbed, and people beginning to figure it out. But there's a much higher dimension to that, which is we are a part of all that is. And even the energy that we're working with is not generated, does not originate in our own selves. Master put it in Autobiography of a Yogi, in one of those classic aphorisms, that's just one sentence. Thoughts are universal. They are not individually rooted. We do not create our thoughts. We merely attune ourselves to a vibration of awareness, and then we open ourselves to that and become a channel for it. So the question is not, what do I want to manifest, but what do I want to attune myself to? Because when I attune myself to something, we are literally a radio, and the kind of radio that hardly exists anymore, where you had to turn the dial to tune it in. The little radio, not little, the radio that I grew up with as a child, it was part of a whole console with a record player in the middle of it. But for many years of my life, it was taller than I was. Then I remember when I became eye level with it, and I became eye level with this big dial and this big knob, and we knew which stations had the programs that we wanted to hear, and we turned it on. I'm not that old, but I'm old enough. Television also happened when I was a child. And we would turn that on, and you turn this big dial, and you try to get it exact. And when you got it exact, all of a sudden this energy, music, voices, comedy programs, children's stories, all the fun things we had, would come flooding into the room. But if there was interference, or if the dial wasn't exact, then there was this chaos, and you only got pieces of it. So perfect image, which is not as vivid for people as it was for me because of that radio. Perfect image, though, it's out there. It's waiting to happen. And it's not a question of my sort of getting a big shovel and scooping it into my satchel and then sealing up my satchel and taking it home. It's radiating out there at all times. I mean, now we have computers, even the live stream of this, you can go to it, you click on it, and all of a sudden I'm talking to you. And you can also easily click and go away and tune into something else. And while I'm talking to you, you are receiving this reality. As soon as you click, you go receive another reality. But all the realities are just spinning out there. And this gives us a perfect picture to understand that there is this constant flow of consciousness, of divine consciousness, that is permeating this level of consciousness, but we have our dial focused somewhere else. So coming right back to this one sentence, which in actual fact all of this has been about, one finds love not by being loved, but by loving. In other words, one steps into the vibration of love by deciding that that's what I want to be a channel for. And what causes the static, which makes it us so hard to receive that, is that we, we are one with the infinite. It's possible for us to open our window of awareness and become pure channels, or increasingly pure channels of the infinite vibration just as it's coming down. But what happens is we define ourselves smaller and smaller and smaller. That is the what about me? This is, I am an ego, I need these things, this is what I have to have. I am separate from other entities. I have to grab for myself. Nobody's really going to take care of me. Or just, I'm lonely, I must have. All of these things which define us according to our limitations instead of our infinity. So the mere thought, I want to be loved, says that love is a finite quality, that it originates from these finite sources that I can see, that I have to attract one of these finite sources to give me love, or else I won't have love. And what Swami's suggesting right at the start is, no, that's just completely backwards. We have to attune ourselves to the vibration of love. Now, again, he doesn't say that you won't be loved in return. He's just saying to find love. And now, will we be loved in return? Will the idea that we have also be fulfilled? Well, what he's also implying is it won't matter as much. One finds love by giving it, because then one lives in a universe in which love is being offered. And it's very, this is a whole nother dimension of the way the magnetism works. One creates a universe in which friendship, love, selflessness, service, giving, generosity, that's the world that we create, and the world reflects back to us the world we create. That's the vibration we're on. If we're on that vibration, we live in that vibration. And it's self-evidently defined. Those who are generous-hearted and giving, it's inspiring to others to want to be generous-hearted and giving back to them. And I don't mean a kind of martyred, oh, look at me, I give so much. I mean really being in that vibration, because the divine isn't stingy with us. The divine doesn't think, well, look at me, I'm working so hard and nobody appreciates me. It's the joy of the giving, and the joy of the giving creates that magnetism. And so this is the further extension of all this understanding. Yes, it's energy, but what is that energy? And yes, if we channel the right kind of energy, then we will live in a world of that kind of energy. But how do we attune ourselves to that? And that's where Master's teachings keeps bringing society step by step. Swamiji said the day will come when Master's teachings, and interestingly, he said not necessarily Master's name, but the teachings of self-realization that Master and others at this time are bringing into this world will eventually become the definition of society, for one very simple reason. It works. That's all. That's why people eat organic foods and whole grain cereals now, because it works. That's why people meditate. That's why they do yoga, because experience has taught us that this is a truth worth living by. Bless you.